The late afternoon sun stretched low over the desolate plains, painting the dust and sagebrush in strokes of gold and copper, while the air shimmered with a dry heat that made the horizon waver like a dream. Out here, where the wind whispered secrets only the lonely could hear, Thomas Briggs rode slow atop his sorrel mare, his weathered hat tipped low, the kind of man whose silence told more stories than his voice ever could, and beside him, trotting with an eager yet watchful gait, was Scout. The loyal cattle dog who had been his shadow since boyhood. They were headed home from a long day's ride, dust caked into the folds of his duster, when Scout suddenly froze mid-step, nose lifted, ears pricked toward the far edge of the gulch ahead. Thomas narrowed his eyes, the easy rhythm of the day broken, and nudged his mare forward, scanning the rolling land until he caught sight of something lying half-hidden in the dirt, something that did not belong to this empty country. At first it looked like just a heap of tattered fabric blown off a wagon, but as the wind caught it, he saw the pale outline of a face, the faint glint of hair tangled with dust, and his pulse tightened in his chest. Without hesitation, he swung down from the saddle, boots crunching on the brittle ground, while Scout dashed ahead, circling the still figure with low whines as if pleading for it to move. She was young, too young to be alone out here, her dress torn, her lips cracked and dry, and her skin burning hot with fever, yet there was a stubborn rise and fall to her breath that told him she was clinging to life. "Miss," he rasped, kneeling, his calloused fingers brushing the dust from her cheek, and for a moment her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes clouded with pain yet holding a strange recognition, as if she knew him in some deep, impossible way. He lifted her carefully, the weight of her body alarming in its frailty, and carried her to his mare, settling her in front of him before turning for home at a gallop, dust flying in their wake. As the ranch came into view, his mind churned with questions. Was she from one of the scattered homesteads, or had she been traveling with a wagon train that never made it? But no answer came, only the haunting way she murmured his name in a voice that trembled between reality and fever dream, a name he'd never given her. Hours later, after Doc Whitmore had come and gone, shaking his head at the severity of her dehydration and the deep bruise along her ribs, Thomas sat by the bedside, Scout lying sentinel at the foot, and studied her face in the lamplight, trying to place why it stirred a memory he couldn't quite grasp, a flicker from years ago of a promise made in the twilight of childhood, of a girl whose laugh once echoed across the fields of his family's farm, and just before sleep claimed her, she whispered something that froze him in place, words that no stranger could possibly know. Words of an old vow they had spoken as children by the creek, a vow that one day they would marry, no matter the distance or the years. Thomas's breath caught, the weight of the moment pressing in like the dark outside the window, and in that instant he understood that the woman Scout had found dying in the dust was not a stranger at all, but the girl from his past, grown into the woman he had once promised to make his bride, now returned to him in the most mysterious and perilous way imaginable. And as the lamp flickered and the wind howled outside, he realized the fight to save her life had only just begun, and so had the reckoning with the past he had long since buried. The night wore on in silence except for the low moan of the wind through the eaves and the steady tick of the mantel clock, and Thomas sat slouched forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, watching the rise and fall of her chest as if the rhythm itself might falter if he looked away. Outside, the land slept beneath a silver wash of moonlight, but his thoughts refused rest, tangled with memories of a summer long ago when he'd first met her, Lila Mae Carver, barefoot by the creek, hair wild from the wind, the kind of girl who could outclimb him in the cottonwoods and outlaw him in any dare. He remembered the day her family had packed a wagon and vanished eastward, leaving behind only the echo of her promise that she'd find her way back to him someday. And now, a decade later, she'd been found half dead in the dust on a stretch of land where no traveler should be alone, wearing a dress fine enough to belong to a banker's daughter but torn as if she'd been running from the devil himself. Just before dawn, her fever broke, and she stirred with a low gasp, her eyes flying open wide, searching the shadows until they found his face, and for a heartbeat the fear in them melted into relief. "Tom," she breathed, her voice like paper, and then her hand clutched at his sleeve, desperate. "He's coming for me." Thomas's gut tightened. He'd heard those words before, from survivors of raids, from fugitives hiding out on the ranch till the law passed through, but never in a tone like hers, one that carried both terror and certainty. She tried to sit up, but pain racked her and he eased her back against the pillow, murmuring that she was safe here, though even as he said it he knew safety was a fragile thing on the frontier. When she finally spoke again, her story came haltingly, of a man named Clayton Rourke, a land baron turned outlaw who had set his eyes on her not for love but for leverage, claiming her inheritance was the key to some sprawling empire he aimed to control. She'd run, fleeing with only the clothes on her back, chased across miles of open country until her strength gave out. The sound of Scout barking suddenly cut through the room, sharp and urgent, and Thomas was on his feet in an instant, crossing to the window just in time to catch the distant flicker of torchlight on the ridge, too far to make out shapes but close enough to churn his stomach with a cold dread. Someone was out there, and they weren't just passing through. He grabbed his Winchester from the rack by the door, his voice low but steady as he told Lila to stay put, and stepped out into the night air. That bit colder than it had any right to in August. Scout was already at the edge of the yard, hackles raised, staring into the darkness as if he could see the men Thomas only suspected were there. The minutes dragged, the torchlight vanished, and silence returned, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that presses against your ears and tells you the quiet won't last. When Thomas returned inside, Lila was sitting up despite her pain, her eyes bright with urgency, telling him that Clayton wouldn't stop, that he'd chase her to the ends of the earth because the promise they had made as children, the one she had carried in her heart all these years, had been overheard once by someone who twisted it into a tale of destined union, and now, in some cruel turn of fate, the men hunting her believed that promise gave him claim to her. Thomas felt the heat of rage stir in him, the kind that could turn a quiet rancher into a man ready to fight, but under it was something stronger, a vow renewed in the marrow of his bones that he would protect her, not because of a promise made by a creek long ago, but because he could not imagine letting her be taken from him again. Outside, the first blush of sunrise spilled over the horizon, setting the plains alight, and Thomas knew the day ahead would be the last quiet one they'd have for a long time. The storm was coming, and when it broke, it would test every ounce of grit, loyalty, and love they had left. If you don't want to miss how this fight unfolds, the secrets that will rise from the dust, and the moment Thomas will have to choose between vengeance and keeping his word, make sure to subscribe now, because what's coming next will change everything.